here in the United States, what we have going on pales into comparison to other places around the world, Australia, New Zealand, and our friends to the north, Canada. And so, I mean, unless you've been completely under a rock, you might have heard something about the Ottawa protest. So the Canadian Truckers Convoy or the Freedom Convoy goes by, a lot of different names. And so I believe at this point, I believe this is the 23rd day that they've been protesting, occupying Ottawa, which is where the Parliament of Canada meets. And they've been honking, it's been peaceful, partying, just a lot of love. But yesterday and the night before that into yesterday, things began to get intense. I'll give a little bit more background in a second, but last night, basically, the police started coming in and having direct confrontations with the protesters. And like I said, from all accounts, I mean, if you listen to the government TV, they're going to tell you, oh, these protesters are racist and they're sexist and they're the white supremacists and they're terrorists. But if you go to the live streams, like you can literally open up YouTube or whatever app that you use, and there's dozens of people live streaming. You can see for yourself what's going on there. Obviously, you're not going to be able to see every single thing, but you can get a lot of different perspectives. And from what I've seen, it's overwhelmingly peaceful. It's overwhelmingly about freedom and love and coming together with your brothers and sisters and claiming your God-given rights. And yet, of course, this is what they do. They have to make them look bad. So this reporting here is from Teachers for Choice. Again, the organization I said, headed by Michael Caine, who's really been spearheading the medical freedom movement, especially when it comes to the teachers here in New York City. And so definitely go to his website. He's been really good about giving updates on the Canadian convoy and everything that's going on there. So that's teachersforchoice.org. Definitely go ahead and check it out. And next, I have some video footage of this kind of increasing intentions, the militarization of the police. And yeah. I wish that there was sound. It doesn't like have sound, but you can see the police. These are protesters right here. They're pushing the line back. Things are starting to get a little bit heated. And then here, they start to get really... So it looks like the protesters are like trying to hold a line. Like the police are pushing up against them and they're like trying to hold the line. So you know what? You could say it's a little bit aggressive, but of the protesters trying to hold, I don't know, the kicking and all that. It doesn't really look good when you see what's going on at these protests, these peaceful people coming to reclaim their fundamental rights. We see it here in New York City when we go to do these sit-ins at the restaurants and the cops come after us. It's like, what are we doing here? But then later on that night, or so it wasn't last night, it was the night before that into the yesterday morning, some of the organizers of the Freedom Convoy were arrested. And so this is the official statement from the Freedom Convoy. They say 3 of our organizers have been arrested. In the sequence of their arrests, the police have detained Chris Barber, Tamara Litch, and Daniel Bulford. This is a grassroots movement, and others will fill their roles. We will continue to hold the line. We refuse to bow to abuses of power. The world is watching Canada. So just a very powerful statement there, right? This is grassroots. You can take away 2 people, but this is we the people. This isn't just 2 or 3 people. This is a whole country of people, and they want to paint the people in the convoy, the Freedom Convoy, as the fringe minority, but it's really the other way around. We are the majority. It's the people for the mandates, and I don't want to demonize them. I don't want to do those sorts of things where you dehumanize somebody, because we see the amount of propaganda that they're putting out on TV. I see perfectly smart, intelligent, reasonable people in every other regard, but then when it comes to this COVID stuff, their brains melt. So I don't want to judge these people for them wanting these mandates. I'm going to work against them. I'm going to politically fight for mine, but I want to do it in a loving way. But it really is the people who think that are the fringe minority. Like those beliefs are super extreme and they're really not held by a lot of people at all. It's just really hard to speak out because the big corporations, the corporate media, they are all pushing the same agenda. So it manufactures consent. It makes it seem like all these people support it when they don't. It's really the minority. And so let's back up a little bit though, like I said, and let's go over some of the context of how did we get here? So we know, of course, it was about 23 or 24 days ago. I guess it was a little more than that because they had to like drive from all across Canada. There was one of the men who was named, kind of seen as one of the leaders, had put out a social media post saying like all the truckers should descend upon Ottawa at the parliament until the mandates are dropped. Because the mandates had just gone in place to say that truckers who went back and forth from the United States, if they were unvaccinated, they weren't allowed to go if they were unvaccinated. Or they had to have like a 14-day quarantine or something like very extreme. And so because of this mandate, even though most truckers actually are vaccinated, they're like, no, this crosses the line and we're going to stand together in solidarity. And altogether, I think on the first weekend, there was over 1 million people in Ottawa, and there's like only 30 million people in all of Canada. So like that's a huge portion of the population. And then, they've been there for 20 days. And of course, you have your wannabe tyrant, Trudeau, who I just remember like it was, I guess when Trump was coming into office, Trudeau ascended into power in Canada and everybody was like goo eyes for Canada, like, oh my God, Trudeau, he's so like handsome. And it's just really gross when people fawn over political figures because it's, when you start to idolize these people, they have so much power and power corrupts. It really doesn't matter how, there's the exception, the George Washington exception, of people who can kind of like let power go and keep their perspective even when they get to the highest position in the world. But that is the absolute exception. So we have to not blind ourselves with this glorification, idolizing. They do it with Fauci too, you can see. But anyways, I digress. So of course he starts to panic. I believe when it first started, he was like, "Oh, I got COVID and I need to isolate," even though he's triple vaxxed. Like, go get the vaccine. That's what he said afterwards. It's like, really, guys? Really? Anybody else kind of getting what's going on here? But so fast forward, he's not sure what to do. He feels like he's losing his grip on power. And so what does he do? He invokes the emergency powers. And so this is a very obscure bill that I don't believe has ever been enacted before, but here's an article that kind of explains it. So Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has invoked the Emergencies Act in an effort to quell the protests by truckers and other groups opposed to measures aimed at preventing the spread of COVID-19. Is it really? Or is it about something else? The federal government has never before acted to implement this once obscure piece of disaster and emergency legislation. Never before have they done this because I believe it's about a foreign power coming in and invading you. Trudeau has suggested the additional tools the Emergency Act provides will allow the federal government to manage situations as they emerge, take extraordinary actions that are time limited, have specific geographic bounds, and deploy a measured use of out of ordinary expansive governmental powers. We totally believe him, right? Totally believe that. Won't go over the line, step out of bounds, just extend their emergencies for what, 2 years now? Take away your ability to go to the store, tell you what you can and can't buy, tell you how much money you can and can't make because your business can only be open certain times, tell you when you can go to church to pray, tell you when your kids can go to school, tell you when you can go outside, tell you when you can breathe air without a cloth over your mouth. Like, these people are out of their minds. And if anybody's still believing this thing, I really need for you to just like take a second and stop and think. As a social studies teacher, one of the things I really do try to teach my students is, yes, the American values and like the American system is ingenious, but government is always still government. Like, we have these fundamental values because you need to always be suspicious of the people who are in charge. And I would argue, if it was not for the Second Amendment, right, your right to keep and bear arms, we would be in a much more similar place to a Canada, to an Australia, to one of these places, Austria, right, where the restrictions are much more intense, at least like, you know, all over the country. In the United States, it's more like there's some really deep blue areas, New York City, down here in Southern Connecticut, Washington, D.C., California, Washington State, and Oregon, like these really strong Democratic areas. That it's pretty bad there. But the country in general, when you talk to people outside, like that live in, I don't know, South Carolina or different parts of the country, Florida, they're not talking about this stuff. They don't ever talk about it unless they talk to somebody where COVID is still a bunch of craziness. So, but all right, let's keep going on. Of course, another quote here from our favorite tyrant of the moment, Trudeau. He said, "This is about keeping Canadians safe, protecting people's jobs, and restoring confidence in our institutions." And yet that's exactly what it undermines. You coming out here and using these emergency powers rather than actually listening to the people who are petitioning you on the streets, using their constitutionally protected rights, which I know Canada's constitution is a little bit different, but I do believe they still have that right there in their constitution. So you're saying that they're undermining the confidence in the institutions. It's zero self-reflection. I wonder what happens. There must be something that happens when you get disconnected, and then it's a pride thing, right? You think about, okay, well, what's my legacy going to be as a leader of this nation, especially because his father, I don't know too much Canadian history, but I do recall when Trudeau was running, it was on the legacy of his father, I believe. And so that's got to be tough, right? Oh, my father has this great legacy and I ascend to follow his lead. And now I'm going to go down in history as one of the worst leaders in Canada. So there's got to be some psychological thing that's going on there. I'm not trying to justify it. I'm just trying to kind of like explain it, try to understand it at least. Because I feel like if we can understand it, maybe you can fight it more effectively, or maybe it doesn't matter. There's only, limited tools to fight those kinds of things, regardless of what the root cause of it is. But like I said, Canadians are fighting back. And that same day, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, and good on them, put out a statement calling Trudeau out. And this is what they had to say. So it says, later that day, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association put out a statement against Justin Trudeau's historic announcement. The CCLA says Trudeau normalizing the Emergencies Act threatens democracy and civil liberties. The Emergencies Act can only be invoked when a situation seriously threatens the ability of the Government of Canada to preserve the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada, and when the situation cannot be effectively dealt with under any other law of Canada. So that's really important there, right? The sovereignty. It's threatening their borders. The borders aren't being threatened here. They're simply protesting in front of the parliament. And I'm sure there's plenty other effective ways to engage these people, like maybe going out on the street and talking to some of them. I don't know. It's just a thought, but what do I know? I'm just a person in my room speaking to a camera.